Today, I'm excited to share with you a conversation I got to have with one of the most notorious pastors of my growing up years, Joshua Harris. Now, before you immediately shut this podcast off, I would ask that you hear me out. As we heard in our episode last time, is a unique burden and heaviness that many former ministry professionals, leaders, pastors, and members of the clergy carry for the role they played in harming others. I know that's something I myself carry. Though I was not a pastor, I was a paid ministry professional, and I had a lot of sway over people's lives, choices, and how they viewed themselves. I judged people according to the standards my faith taught me to. I doled out consequences. I was unrelenting and regularly valued theology and doctrine over humans, relationships, and life. I didn't do this because I was actively trying to have power and control over others. I did this because I had grown up in this environment, experienced this environment, and was taught that this was the right, good, godly, and even loving thing to do. Growing up in it, of course, is not an excuse, but it does help people understand why I engaged in those behaviors as an adult. It's a weird balance to strike, to grieve and allow myself permission to be accurate and honest about what happened to me, while also taking responsibility and making amends for my actions as an adult, even when I thought it was the right thing to do. And I know I'm not alone in this weird space that former ministry leaders are. I've talked to many former members of the clergy and other quote unquote professional religious folks who have had to navigate this part of healing. I first met Joshua Harris in my late high school years when I was introduced to his book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. And to be honest, I hated the book. I hated the prescriptiveness and how many rules there were. I hated the idea that I could have no physical contact with somebody until I was married. And I hated that this was God's plan for godly relationships. When I graduated from high school, however, I began to embrace the book because it laid out a clear and specific plan of what I needed to do in order to receive the reward of a husband, out of this world sex, and a lifetime of serving God. For as much as I hated all the rules, I also found a sense of comfort and stability in them, which was a stark contrast to how I felt in the rest of my life. So I began to embrace the things that I didn't like because it allowed me the illusion of safety and promised me a great reward. And then I taught this to everyone else. I had dozens and dozens of young women that I worked with on a deep level who I taught all of this, what I now know to be harmful teachings too. I was impassioned and spoke with fervor as I discussed God's plans for our lives and relationships. I was sold on the idea that believing and practicing these tenets, even when they didn't make sense to us or caused us to have to cut parts of ourselves off, were what God wanted, and we would be rewarded for them. If not here on earth, then certainly in heaven. Some time ago, I received a comment on one of my posts from someone whose name I couldn't identify, and since their profile was private, I don't know who it was. The comment went something like this, quote, "You were someone who was so influential to me growing up, even though everything you taught me ended up hurting me. And here I am, looking to you again to help get me out of it all," unquote. Whew, that was a heavy comment. It was heavy because I knew this person was right and that what I taught them did hurt them. And I used my position of power to require them to believe things in order to be accepted, connected, and right with God. I had hurt them deeply. I am sure they spent lots of time and money in therapy undoing what I had done. I wish I could give a personal apology to this person, but my invitation to do so never was acknowledged. And honestly, that's okay. I have been grateful for the people that I've been able to talk to from my past life who I have been able to make amends with. I've appreciated the grace they extended to me that was certainly not required, as they recognized the power I exuded over them came from a place of both what had been done to me, what we believed was godly and right. I am grateful for these folks. And as an aside, to the people that I have hurt that don't feel the same way, please know that your healing is completely independent of forgiveness of me. You do not need to forgive me in order to heal and to thrive. I still remember when I heard the news that Joshua Harris was deconstructing his faith. People had suspected it for a while, but he finally confirmed it through an article, and people were eating it up. There was commentary coming from both sides of the spectrum, those that were still inside religion who were rebuking him and calling for him to confess, repent, and return. And then the folks on the other side of the spectrum who were not particularly welcoming to him, as he was someone they identified as a perpetrator of the harm that they endured inside religion. For my part, I was at a place in my life where I could recognize both sides of the spectrum, that the teachings he believed and taught were deeply wounding, but that he had also been wounded too. I didn't need to know his past, though I do now, to know that it deeply influenced who he became as a leader and a pastor. I knew that he too had been privy to these teachings and then carried them out towards others. I also realized that when I was his age, if I had access to a platform the way he did, I 100% would have taken it. Think about it. A 20-year-old kid, the height of our ego, being paraded as the prototype of a godly husband, someone that men should emulate and women should want to marry. I would have jumped at the chance to be that person or married that person. In the end, I'm so thankful that I didn't have that position and that I wasn't in the right place in the country with access to the right people who could prop me up at 20 years old to the masses. I think about who I was, what I thought, how I understood relationships, myself in the world when I was 20 years old. And now, a couple decades later, I know that I should not have been in that position of influence. And yet, like Josh, but on a much smaller scale, I too was propped up in my community as the person that young women should try to become and young men should want to marry. I just didn't have a best-selling book attached to my name and some of the most well-known pastors in the country who were giving me their endorsement. So, why am I telling you this? It's not to make excuses for Josh or any other pastor that may have harmed you. It's not to side with the person who abused you or to minimize your own pain. It's simply to offer a fuller, more robust picture of what was going on for me, for Josh, and for so many others. None of this happens in a vacuum. While there certainly are influential religious leaders that do not come up in the system, but are instead drawn to it because of the power and control they can wield, there are many more who came into these positions with genuine and earnest desires to lead people towards God. It just so happened that in a system built on dynamics of power and control, they were sucked into that as well and were in a position to perpetuate it. And of course, there was also religious leaders who ascended to these positions because they did and do want to have power and control and influence over others. I won't name names here, but I will say I've been blocked by some of them on social media, and I consider it a huge accomplishment. This leads me back to the conversation I'm going to share with you today. One with my now, dare I say, friend, Josh Harris. Despite having quote unquote met Josh through his books and at a purity culture conference decades ago, I first met face to face, met Josh a handful of years ago. I was instantly struck by his kindness and warmth, as well as a sense of sorrow from time to time when he talked about the teachings he promoted. I don't know if, when we met, Josh knew what a purity culture poster child I, too, had been, but in our conversation, he didn't need to know that in order to take responsibility and own the things he had done, albeit directly, to me. Josh was remorseful and genuinely desired to make amends to anyone who would allow him to. I chose Josh for this interview because he is someone who many people know. He is someone who shared a background with so many of us. He grew up in the same fundamentalist teachings and practices. He grew up with a rigid view of how things were supposed to work. He grew up with the same doctrines, theologies, and dogma that so many of us were harmed by. And then he became a pastor and taught these things to others. I wanted to hear from Josh about the unique process of healing from a religious trauma as someone who used to be a religious leader and who was both harmed and harmed others. It's a great conversation, and I hope you'll take a listen. Okay. Andrew. Oh man, it is so good to have you here because there are so many things that the Lord is laying on my heart for prayer requests. So many things we need to be praying about that are happening.
Oh, absolutely. It's been
too long.
I know,
Yeah,
since we've done one of these. I don't
know.
It's been a long time. And
I
so there's
know.
so
Oh,
many things. So many
it's
things.
so many things like that the Lord is just laying on my heart to be Well, I mean, I think we probably, before we pray about them, we probably just have to like talk about them, right? So that we can know what
Well,
we're
yeah.
praying
I
about.
mean, yeah. I mean, how can you pray for something if you don't know what the something is?
True.
So
That's
it's only
true.
logical.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, I know for me, I was really touched when Mark Driscoll said that he had been up all night praying at the strongman conference. I don't know if you're tracking with me here. There's like this
Mm,
men that are getting together to be strong men, I guess.
yeah.
Yeah, like and they have like swords and I don't know, just whatever like strong men do. You're a man. Is this what you
Doing
do? Like
strong
you
men
like
doing strong manly things and
yeah, like I'm
using.
assuming that you get together with your guy friends and like rip your shirts off and like swallow swords and climb up poles. Is that what you do?
Oh, that's some weekends. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
what strong manly men do. So, certainly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So I mean, yeah, obviously though, I mean, this was like really on Mark Driscoll's heart and so it's on my heart too, to pray about. And yeah, so he was like really disturbed about this at the strongman's conference because apparently they had hired some guy to do this and Mark Driscoll was wrestling with it and really felt that it was a Jezebel spirit that had been taken over the event, which I'm pretty endeared to because my other podcast is The Wise Jezebels and so I kind of felt like he was shouting us out a little bit, like I'm all about the Jezebel spirit taking over. I feel like that's exactly what's needed at a strongman's conference. And the amount of misogyny that Mark Driscoll insisted on, like just lacing his descriptions with, like the amount of times he had to be saying things like a woman would do, like, and he tore off his shirt like a woman would, and he climbed up a pole like a woman. I was just like, who hurt you? What what did a woman do to you that you must describe it this way? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I saw some of the, like, I didn't see the whole thing, but like some of the clips of what you just were referencing after the fact. Oh my God. It's like, I mean, and Mark Driscoll, of course, it's Mark Driscoll. So like, the bar wasn't set very high in terms of my expectations for him. But then he goes and says all
Right.
of this shit, and I'm just like, of course it would be you. Of course you would say this. But and it's like funny and nauseating simultaneously. But also, I mean, it is like, I mean, so indicative of just the larger culture, though. Purity culture,
Right.
evangelicalism, just that as a whole. Like, it is a funny anecdote that's like one of the cringiest things I think I've seen so far this year. But oh my God, there's so many people that also agree with him.
Yeah, I mean, yes. And but okay, so here I'm like thinking like logistically speaking. So I went and spoke at an event a couple weeks ago and I'm a detail person. I like to know things ahead of time, but I also think that as a speaker, you just ask normal questions like, what is this event about? Who else is going to be there? What are the other details that I should know? What is the purpose? Like, I can imagine no scenario where Mark Driscoll would not know that information, would not know, like, hey, there's a gay stripper who's going to be swallowing swords and dancing on a pole, like at this event. Mark Driscoll had to have known that. This was not a shock or surprise to him,
Yeah.
right? This was 100% known to him. And I think he went into this event not only knowing that, but thinking that he could use this event as a way to one of two things, either like call the Holy Spirit down and have some revival moment, or be a total martyr, that he could, like, knowing he would get kicked off stage exactly like he did. And then he could use that to his advantage to say, I was showing up, rebuking calmly in the name of Christ, asking people to repent. And look, I was kicked off stage for showing up and doing God's work. And I think he got exactly what he was hoping he would get.
Mm. Yeah, that is a good point. Like the idea of it being premeditated. I mean, the guy may be obnoxious, but he's not stupid.
He is not stupid.
I actually hadn't thought of it like that, but I do think you're right. That's a interesting point. And
Yes.
so then, he goes up there and does what he does
Hmm.
and then gets to, cry, help, help, I'm being repressed,
Yeah, yeah,
basically.
exactly. Yeah. Speaking of other very kind of stupid business ministry moves, did you hear about what's happening with the International House of Prayer, IHOP, in Kansas City?
I have heard bits and pieces. I'll be
That
honest,
yeah,
I'm not as familiar with IHOP because when I first hear someone say that, I still immediately think of, a
pancakes.
breakfast a breakfast restaurant that's a competitor of Denny's. So,
Yeah. Not gonna
but
lie, pancakes sound really good right now.
but I have heard bits and pieces about that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah, for those people who don't know, IHOP is, I mean, it is a breakfast chain that I think we should like maybe take a field trip there because it does kind of sound good. I would like some bacon. But it in their case it stands for International House of Prayer, and kind of their whole claim to fame is that there is prayer going on 24/7 and they are just constantly praying. They've got different ministry, kind of church, parachurch organizations, all over the place. And they've got all sorts of different, they even have like different kind of companies connected to them, coffee shops, and things like that to, like help pay the bills, which is pretty common with a lot of like parachurch nonprofit organizations where they'll start little like ministries, like food trucks and things like that
Right.
that are connected so that they can make money. IHOP is no different. And several months ago, they had some allegations come out against them, things that like sexual misconduct allegations, things like that. The founder of IHOP, Mike Bickle, there was allegations that came out against him. If I'm remembering correctly, he stepped down. There were some internal investigations that were going on. And a few days ago, so as we're recording this, but by the time this episode drops, it's going to be roughly about 2 weeks ago. Um, there was an article that came out and they said rather than, kind of like trying to move forward without Mike Bickle, they are just closing their doors entirely, just doing away, like firing
Wow.
all of their staff, like doing away with their millions and millions of dollars worth of budgets and organizations and companies and shutting down completely. They said that they were going to try to keep some of their organizations open and do a quote unquote rebrand. But we all know what's happening there. I mean, that's going to last less than 18 months for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah. They need some
Wow.
prayer.
Oh, wow. And then it really makes me wonder just like what is really going on underneath all of that. Like, I mean, that's for the everything to be closing down essentially. I mean, and I know they're attempting to rebrand, like you said, but I agree. It's not, it's like an extinction burst. I understand why they're trying that, but I don't think it'll last.
Yeah. I mean, don't you think that 24/7 of prayer should have gotten better results?
You would, what you would think. I mean, you know.
Come on, Andrew, be snarky with me.
Oh my God. Yeah, you would think you would think it would, or that they would have maybe had some foresight to maybe see this coming, or I don't know,
Hmm.
or been able to
Hmm.
avoid it in the first place, whatever's
Yeah.
going on.
You know what's so interesting? So we just talked about Mark Driscoll. We're talking about IHOP, which centered around Mike Bickle. So Mark
Mhm.
Driscoll's church was Mars Hill, and when there was all the internal investigation done around him and the abuses that he was engaging in, the behaviors that he was engaging in, he was asked to leave Mars Hill, which is the church that he founded. And the idea was that, Mars Hill is not built around Mark Driscoll. Like, this is not Mark Driscoll's church. This is God's church. So it doesn't matter if Mark Driscoll leaves. Like, this is God's church, and Mars Hill will continue on. And I want to say it was less than a year to a year and a half before Mars Hill's churches started closing down. And there was
Hmm.
many, many, many satellite campuses of Mars Hill, and quickly the doors started closing. Because if we're being honest, the church was all about Mark Driscoll. It was
Right.
about his personality. Dare I say, we're talking about a cult of personality. And it started closing down. And the same thing is happening here. Like, IHOP was built around Mike Bickle, and we're seeing the same thing. He stepped away, and IHOP is not the same because it was built around this person. And I just feel like that's worth noting. Here's these huge organizations that have multi-million dollar budgets, that have multiple locations. And as soon as the leader who is taken down and are power hungry, step away, the organizations crumble.
Hmm. Yeah. No, that's a good comparison. Yeah. It's almost like, to use this analogy, like you cut off the head of the serpent and the rest of the snake dies.
What?
So yeah, that's interesting. But I agree with you. Like the cult of personality, yeah, I've thought that. I mean, and those are of course instances where it's all they stepped away for whatever reason, and then the whole thing collapsed. And I think the same would be
Yeah.
true of so many other organizations
Hmm.
too.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm. Yeah,
yeah.
I agree.
Wow.
It's sad. I mean, it's not shocking, but it is still sad because people are hurt in the process of it.
Yeah. Yes. I
Hmm.
mean that's the thing. I definitely think about the people that, yeah, may be part of a harmful system, but are well-meaning and they do have good intentions and they are sincerely trying to do the best they can with what they have. That whole thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I even think of course, I'm thinking in terms of like Seventh Day Adventist ministries, but like I have family members who
Sure.
kind of, have kind of been the same way, have done the same sort of things, and I don't agree with them, but I also know that in many cases, like they are very sincere people that they are really trying. And so
Mm.
like I do have a little bit of compassion for those folks. Not the leaders, no, I don't really have
Mm.
any compassion for the leaders or the institutions,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
a lot of mixed feelings in that regard.
Yeah. I get that for sure. Yeah. What about you, Andrew? Any prayer requests that you have?
Oh, yeah. Well, this one comes from my home state, so I feel like, yeah,
Ooh.
it's only appropriate that I bring this one up. Some of you may or may not know who this person is by name. The name's not really important, but the Reverend
Mm.
Bobby Leonard of Bible Baptist Tabernacle in Monroe, North Carolina.
I am unfortunately
Um,
familiar. Yeah.
yeah. Well, and prior to 2 months ago, I don't know that anybody knew who he was, which was probably for the best, but he went viral
Yes. Hmm.
for remarks that he made in a sermon. I mean, this was part of his sermon, I believe.
Yes,
Um,
it was.
Basically talking about rape and that if, I mean, the gist of it is that if a woman was wearing shorts and was dressing in ways that I guess he deemed as not being appropriate, that and he was in the jury, that yeah, he wouldn't convict the person, the rapist,
Hmm.
that is. And yeah, and rightfully so, he got a shit ton of criticism from
Yeah.
everywhere. Um,
Yeah.
but again, it's just one of those things where it's just like he said the thing out loud, which on the
Hmm.
one hand, I want to be careful how I say this. I do not appreciate him, but I appreciate him just saying it rather than beating around the
Sure.
bush and pretending like it's something. Because the thing is, there are a lot of people in Christian fundamentalism who absolutely agree with him and believe that same thing. And so it's almost like at least you just said it out loud. I mean, and admitted, like purity culture. I mean, is rape culture, and I know, and I believe
Hmm.
you've said that before, and I agree with that
Absolutely.
wholeheartedly. And
Hmm.
anecdotes like this just confirm it.
Hmm. Yeah. I can totally see where you're coming from of like sometimes it makes it easier to just like it's like shocking and appalling when somebody
Yeah.
says that. because it should be shocking and appalling. And then there's a little bit of like relief of like, well, at least I don't have to wonder where you stand because you said it. Like I don't have to wonder anymore. And then when you watch the people that agree or clap or like nod their heads along and you're like, and thank you too for showing me exactly where you stand on this as well.
Hmm.
Because now
Yeah.
I can determine if you're a safe person for me in that area. Um, and unfortunately, I think there's like many people that agree wholeheartedly with a statement like that. Um, yeah, I whenever that clip of his went viral kind of in the post-religious spaces, I did an article on that because on a personal level, I mean, rape is a part of my own personal story. And that was literally the very first thought that I had for myself personally afterwards was I think this is because my shorts were too short because I was wearing shorts that were too short. Like verbatim, that was my thought. And I know that that doesn't necessarily make sense to a person who's never experienced that because somebody on the outside can be like, of course, that's not why. That's like not
Right.
something you should be thinking. But when you are the victim of something like that, you are looking for literally any reason to make sense of something that does not make sense. And so then when you hear that from a person who's in a position of authority, especially spiritual authority, who you are
Right.
taught to believe is speaking on behalf of God, those words hit in a completely different way. And it brings about a sense of shame that it's very hard to put words around like how that lands in your body. And even though I personally am years past that and have worked through the shame and how that lived in my body back then, like I still, when I heard him say that, I was like, oh, like it took me like a full weekend. Like a good friend of mine texted me a heads up of like, hey, I want you to know this article is coming out. You're gonna be seeing it. And she knew me well enough. She knew exactly my story. And she's like, so I just want you to know. And it was like, it took me a full weekend to really like get my feet back on the ground because of that. And I just think there are so many pastors that make these seemingly flippant comments. And it even reminds me of like Josh Howerton, who's been in the news as of late, who are like, oh, I was just joking. Don't take it so seriously. Or that's your fault if you are like taking offense to it. And it's like, no, like you're actually promoting really, really harmful messages, like you said, and I've said too, like purity culture is rape culture. Like it's not that there's like a little tiny overlap in those circles. It's like the same circle. Like the research even shows that. So to be quote unquote joking about that, that's not funny. I could
Yeah.
get on a whole soapbox. Talk about
Yeah.
prayer requests. Like I could get a full fucking
Yeah.
sermon here.
Well, yeah. Well, it's like, well, and the thing is, well, first of all, did he try to play off like that he was joking or that using hyperbole or
So
something?
So Bobby didn't. He did not say
Okay.
he
Okay.
was joking. He did try to backtrack and he wrote like a statement that where he tried to say, I shouldn't have said this. I don't believe that, sexual assault or sexualized violence should occur. That's not the fault of the victim. It doesn't matter what they're wearing. And did try to backtrack that. I can appreciate that somebody tries to learn from their mistakes. Like on a very human level, I can appreciate that. However, as a therapist who has clients who are victims of that pastor, I get real hot. Like when
Yeah.
I'm like, no, 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 like it should not take that because I know people who have talked to you before, who have had those conversations. It should not take public outcry at that level for that to happen. I have when I know multiple people who have gone to you on individual levels, that's not okay. Like,
Mhm.
no.
Well,
So
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I didn't hear that specifically, but yeah,
Hmm.
that he followed up at all. But yeah,
Hmm.
it's one of those things where, I realize I'm skeptical as hell, but I'm like, dude, you're just pissed that you got caught and got
100%.
absolutely dragged through the mud, went viral.
Yeah.
I mean, you were getting hate mail from all over the world, and frankly, you should have been. So
Yeah.
it's like,
Yes.
had it not been on such a large scale, you would not have said shit. So sit down and shut up, dude.
Yes. Well, and when I was referring to the joke, I was mostly referring to Josh Howerton, who came out then, I think it was actually like maybe Easter
Mhm.
Sunday or the Sunday after, where he had this clip where he talked about it was like this whole like ladies or like men, hey, like your wives or ladies have like dreamt their whole life of their wedding day. So like wear what they want you to wear, stand where they want you to stand, do what they want you to do.
Yeah.
And hey, ladies, like men have dreamed of their wedding night. So wear what they want you to wear, stand what they want you to stand, where they want you to stand, do what they want you to do. And just this recognition of like that actually really promotes rape culture and like all the implications of that. And that's not equatable to a wedding day. And like, how just like all I could go into that, and then he tries to like backtrack that, and we just like Bobby does of like whoa like I whatever, and he's like that's just a joke, like you took it out of context, whatever. And it's like these pastors are like, no dude, you like talked out of your ass, like you should not have said that. That's actually what the statement is you fucked up, you shouldn't have said that, like you showed your cards
Hmm.
and you shouldn't have. And you caused a great amount of harm and you didn't think before you spoke. And people are listening to you. And that's a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I think you said earlier, like I'm all about people like learning from their mistakes and taking accountability
Mm-hmm.
and changing. Like that is something that I do genuinely value. But it's like the fact that so in both of these cases and many other cases that I'm sure never made it to social media, right? It's like,
Yeah.
but the fact that that was kind of like the autopilot thing for you to say, and you
Yeah.
didn't think that there was something wrong with it until you got called out and got negative publicity, like that's
Mm-hmm.
the problem. That's the culture.
Yeah.
That's what this whole system is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Well, and even like back to good old Mark Driscoll, I think that we have so many pastors that are speaking about things that they have no business speaking about. And I
Right.
don't actually mean that. I want to be careful because I think oftentimes pastors are asked to speak about things or expected to speak about things that they don't have any business speaking about. They're put in roles that they should not be. Like pastors are expected to counsel people and they should not be expected to do that, right? Like you've got like the country pastor who's expected to be a pastor and a counselor and a this and a that. And it's like, they shouldn't have to be that. Like they shouldn't have to, help you through all of these different things, right? And yet they are expected to do that. A pastor should not be expected to be a sex therapist. A pastor should not be expected to do all these things.
Mhm.
You should not do that. Like you shouldn't, as a therapist, I have to be within my scope of practice. Like,
Right.
right? Like that's just what I have to do. And so I shouldn't be speaking about like oncology practices. That would be really unwise for me to like get on here and tell you how you should be treating your cancer.
Right.
Don't listen to me if I start doing that, right? Just like Josh Howerton should not be speaking about like sex practices on your wedding night, like, you
Right.
know, or what's his name, Bobby Leonard or
Yeah.
whatever,
Bobby.
like
Yeah. Bobby Leonard. Yeah.
speaking about, sexualized violence, like that's no, he shouldn't be doing that, So it's like, I think there's that piece of it too. Same with Mark Driscoll, like,
Right.
who infamously calls women penis homes. Like, you shouldn't be talking about sex, dude. Like, that's just like way out of the scope of your practice.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Well, and then it's also just like the whole dynamic. I mean, and this is like the misogyny, patriarchal stuff through and through, but like the fact that men are feeling entitled to set themselves up as experts on something that, in the case of like sexualized violence against women, you don't know what that's like because as a man,
Mhm.
you are not being targeted for that based on
That's fair.
based on your gender. It's like, well, how the hell are you going to stand there
Yeah.
and be this self-proclaimed expert on the thing? And yeah, and then it always amazes me, just any of these like anecdotes that we hear from different sermons or whatever talks that these guys give, and it's like the emphasis is always on victim blaming, but it's never
Yes.
on gouging out your own fucking eyes, which is in fact the namesake of your religion told you to do if you're having issues with impure thoughts. And so, yeah, that's anyway. It's
Yeah.
just it's remarkable. It's astounding. I don't know. I don't know what more to say. I'm at a loss of words.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, I'll give snaps to that. Like, for real. I mean, no, I mean, thank you. Like, as a woman, I will say thank you to that, because I think that that's where some of the frustration comes in, is like, I am all about having conversation and dialogue. It's hard to hear like a Josh Howerton say, I was joking. You took this too far. Like, you took it out of context. I'm like, yeah, but you've never been on the receiving end of that. You've never understood what it's like to be a woman in that position, and the obligation, or the what it's like to feel frozen on the other side of that. Or, like, I've been that woman. I've also worked with those women. I have those women friends, like,
Hmm.
I do understand that. And that's
Yeah.
not to suggest that men can't be victims. It's not to suggest
Hmm.
that all men do that, or that purity culture and that messaging isn't harmful for men. That's certainly not what I'm saying. It's just, you have to think broader. You have to think at the totality of the implication of those messages, and it's just so incredibly harmful.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Damn.
I agree.
I'm glad you're back for prayer requests. I missed you.
Yeah. No, it's good to be back. It's great to be back.
Yeah.
Wow, it's just so many things have happened, and I feel like there's so much to talk about. And this is just in the past couple of months. I feel like there's even more we could talk about if we went back to the whole several months
Yes.
since I've last done one of these segments with you. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
good to be back.
Yeah. Well, I think on that note, for the prayer request, we can just wrap it up and say, like, all God's people said, Amen.
Amen.
For those of you who don't know Josh Harris, he is a former pastor and poster child of the purity culture movement, with his formerly best-selling book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, which was published when he was 21, which meant that he was even younger when he wrote it, like 19 years old. The book and the pastors around him gave Josh a national platform where he was looked to as an authority, and subsequently someone whose teachings were incredibly harmful. In 2015, Josh left formal ministry and the United States, and just a few years after that, Josh and his then wife announced they were dissolving their marriage, and Josh began to publicly speak about his faith deconstruction process. Josh has received both welcome and warning from people in post-religious spaces, and though he does not consider himself a leader in the faith deconstruction spaces, he desires to hold space and hear stories from people who are coming out of these environments, many of whom were deeply harmed by the teachings he was taught, lived, and promoted. In Josh's words, quote, I spent the first 40 years of my life promoting what I now see as narrow, controlling, fear-based religion. Today, I'm an advocate for the freedom to change, grow, and walk away from systems and beliefs that no longer fit. I want to see religious and non-religious communities healthier. Stepping outside of rigid religion, I found that there's a lot of room for discovery, for hearing and telling new stories, for creating new things in business, and spotlighting people whose ideas can reshape the world. So, with that, let's get into this conversation with Josh Harris. Welcome to Sunday School Dropouts, Josh. It is great to have you here.
Oh, it's good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Yes, it's been a long time coming. I'm so excited to have this conversation. So today we're talking about being a ministry professional and kind of the healing process coming out of being what I call a professional Christian, into into life, real world. I don't know. But one of the things we like to start out with all of our guests is just whatever you feel comfortable with. What is just kind of a brief history for yourself of religion?
Mm,
What did you grow up in? And maybe a little bit moving towards how you got out of it.
yeah. Okay. Well,
That's a long conversation.
I was born into the church. Uh,
Hmm.
my my dad and mom became Christians in their early 20s, late teens, early 20s.
Ah, okay.
Got saved out of the Jesus movement, and so they were very zealous and very in love with each other and with Jesus,
Mhm.
and just threw themselves into the life of the church. So I came along, and my upbringing was marked by my dad planting a church down in Texas. So kind of
Yes.
like, ministry work, lived across from the church, and then um, part of his studies in college was on homeschooling. So besides pastoring, he started,
Yeah.
studying like communication and doing workshops. And one of his first workshops was on
Yeah.
homeschooling.
Oh, wow.
So our family
Yeah.
was like very quickly became very involved in the early homeschool movement. That was a big part of
Mhm.
our identity, a big part of my dad's ministry slash business. And so I grew up with just a lot of awareness of this audience that was watching me because
Yeah.
I was like the
Yeah.
example of homeschooling working, and I was the illustration in all of my dad's talks. And so he went around the country,
Wow.
spoke to hundreds of thousands of families over the
Hmm.
years, traveled most weekends doing that. And it was, kind of the family business at the same
Wow.
time. So, had a, again, I was homeschooled. I kind of pushed back and rebelled against the rules of, my parents' faith as a high schooler, but
Yeah.
then very quickly, came back to a very like passionate pursuit of God in youth group. So very
Hmm.
involved in a influential evangelical Bill Hybels influenced kind of church in Oregon.
Yes. Yes, I get
Youth
that.
youth group was the center of my life,
Mhm.
and and it was in that context that I grappled with what my parents were teaching me about purity. They were trying to get me to read Elizabeth Elliot's book,
Oh
Passion and
God.
Purity, and
Yes.
I was dating a girlfriend, and so the book that I wrote, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, came out of that, where I kind of decided, no, I want to be serious about God. I want to serve Him with every
Yeah.
part of my life. Wrote
Hmm.
that book, and then very quickly got into ministry. Essentially, I was traveling the
Yeah.
country doing workshops,
Hmm.
and met a group of churches and a pastor who was willing to mentor me and saw
Hmm.
potential in me. So moved away from Oregon and moved to the East Coast, and was like living in the pastor's basement, his protege. Instead of sort of
Yeah.
being a part of the life and community of people my age, I was with the pastors immediately.
Yes.
Got married
Hmm.
not too long after that, and then was just in
Hmm.
ministry for 17 years essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my faith was so tied up with professional role. I didn't think of it that way at the time,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Absolutely.
you know, everything that I would do and experience in my relationship with God and the spiritual things I was dealing with was always filtered through the lens of, how can I share this with other people? How can I, be inspiring to others, lead others, be an example?
Mm.
And yeah, that position and that role was a massive part of my identity.
Yeah, I would think so. Even given your age at the time, like you came into it at such an impressionable age, right? Like you're at the natural time of figuring out who am I, what am I all about,
Yeah.
what's important. And here's these people that are like, you're the shit. Like we're gonna, like we want you as a leader in the
Yeah.
church. That's got to feel like, I mean, to the 20-year-old ego, that's got to feel great, you know?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I have this very distinct memory of being at a Michael W. Smith concert, and he's playing that
Ooh.
song "Place in This World."
Oh gosh. Yeah.
You know, you, you can
I know
you
the
can feel
song.
the
I
feelings like,
am I am back in the amphitheater at the camp that my dad was a director at right now
yeah.
with that song blaring. Yeah.
That song was playing, and I remember, yeah, I mean, I must have been like maybe 18, 19 years old, and I just
Hmm.
was like, God, give me my place in this world. So it's just like, it is so true. Like, it's a time in your life where you're trying to figure out, where do I fit? What value do I have? What do I base my sense of self on?
Hmm.
What's meaningful? How can I carve out space in this world? Like, that's just a normal
Yeah.
human desire. And what's so powerful about religion is that it gives you this incredible sense of community, this incredible sense of you're a part of
Yeah.
something that's, is so much bigger than you. And when you
Hmm.
immerse yourself in that church context, all the people you're looking up to, the leaders, the people that are standing up in front of you,
Hmm.
teaching you every week,
Hmm.
um, they being in ministry is like the most respected thing. And so if you don't
Yes.
have another community that's saying, hey, you could be the world's best plumber, or you could be whatever, I don't
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
whatever the other community is, then that's going to be such an incredible draw. And
Hmm.
my
Yeah.
family's trade, if you will, is in communication. So, I mean, like
Hmm.
I'm not even special in my family. Like with my other siblings, there are much more talented writers and communicators. Like it's just you grow up around something and it just gets kind of passed on to you. So you have that set of gifts, and here you're in a setting where those gifts are the most valuable gifts, you know?
Yeah.
So
And you kind of believe then that you're like the uniquely gifted, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
because yeah, when that's all you've ever known, and then you come, I resonate like with the timeline and everything of your story that's so close to mine, except that I'm a
Mm.
woman, so I can't do all the leadership things or
Yeah.
whatever. But
There's a
I
there's
was
a
in
ceiling for you, right? Big
yeah,
time.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I was as far up as I could go as like a coordinator, paid
Yeah.
ministry, like doing that sort of stuff. But that was my history too. Like of
Yeah.
just, but it's your unique skills and talents, and they're used to say that that's from God, and that kind of props you up even more.
Right. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that the when you're in ministry as a leader, you're
Hmm.
constantly looking for those people that, and again, it's not always this like terrible kind of motivation. There aren't these backroom
No.
conversations of, oh, let's sink our hooks into this person. But
Yeah. Yeah.
there is this real sense of, like you're saying, if people have these kind of gifts, if they're motivated, if
Yeah.
they're dedicated, if they're showing up and they're serving and they're helping
Yeah.
and so on, and if they're humble and they're
Hmm.
willing to, listen and not ask too many questions, then you're going to quickly be drafted into leadership. And so I think knowing more about my own personality and kind of the way that I operate, I'm just like the perfect person for that, because I immediately just kind of say, like, what's our team? What do we believe? Great, I believe that.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
came into this
Okay.
church that was known for being for having sharper edges theologically. Like they were purposely kind of
Yes.
branding themselves in distinction to sort of a bland, evangelicalism that didn't take a stand on things. And they were taking a stand on everything. They were taking a stand on,
Yes.
predestination. They were taking a stand on the gospel. They were taking a stand on male, female roles, homeschooling,
Hmm.
dating, right down the line. And back to
Hmm.
that, what's appealing to you when you're 20, years old, that just feels like people who actually give a damn, like here are
True.
people who really
Yeah.
care. And,
Yeah.
and then that feeds your ego. Like, I'm not one of these mamby-pamby, kind of
Yes.
Christians. I'm one that actually is willing to, say that people are predestined. You know what I mean? Like, and it's so funny because I'll be on Instagram and I'll see these like, very like, gym culture bro kind of influencers, and they're
Hmm.
talking about how much protein you should eat, or they're talking about, how to date women or whatever the issue is. But I'm like, this is the same exact energy of the evangelical pastors that drew me when I was in my early 20s. It's the same
Yes.
exact energy of somebody who's saying,
Absolutely.
let me tell you exactly how you should think, having strong opinions, even unpopular ones, but it makes a young guy feel like, oh man, I want to be part of someone. I want to learn from someone that actually knows what they think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I call it embodied fundamentalism. Like we
Mm,
just, when we grow up in this culture where everything is very like specific, black or white, right or wrong, good or bad, and
yeah,
we take these stands and this is what you're about. You don't just leave that behind necessarily when you
yeah,
leave the church or you deconstruct your faith or heal from religious trauma. Like that sense of fundamentalism is still very ingrained. And
hmm,
then we see the wellness culture influencers, the gym bros,
yeah,
whoever that are promoting a different message, even though it's the same, kind of
Right.
way that they're doing it.
Yeah. That's so true.
Yeah.
So
I'm
true.
wondering, you kind of off of that, I wonder if you can speak both from the I was a pastor to or like I was pulled into it as a youth and
Mm.
the I was a pastor piece. There is a lot of research that talks about this very specific age group, kind of that adolescent 15 or so to 25. We know brain wise, your brain isn't
Mm.
completely developed. You're still very suggestible, but you're at the height of your ego, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, like you said, here's these people that are saying, we like you. And you're like, hell yes, you do. Like, watch
Yeah.
me, like push the message forward. And there's a lot of research that's coming out saying that's very intentional. Like to target that age of person is very intentional because people, leaders know if we can get you there, like the
Hmm.
likelihood that you'll stay in it and continue to preach that message,
Hmm.
whatever the message is, and get married and have kids and preach that to your kids is so like the likelihood is far greater than if we get
Hmm.
you at 40. Is that something that you felt and or can look back now and see was part of like the quote unquote strategy of like getting people into ministry or how you
Mm.
preached?
Yeah. I mean, I just think it's a common pattern across religion and business and
Sure.
all different settings. I think countries, think in this way. It's just that
Yes.
understanding of while people are malleable and while they have time and energy and passion and are looking to be a part of something, that's the most important time you can reach them. You don't put it in those words. In the church, it's like the next generation. Like, yeah, we're supposed to reach the world, and young people are the future of the church. So it's like, it just makes sense. And it makes sense on a sociological level because that's where all the momentum is. But brands are the same way. I mean, I'm in marketing, and I now I just see everything through that lens, and it's like, of course, every brand is like, oh my gosh, how do we get Gen Z? Oh my gosh, what do we do about Gen Alpha? Like they're just freaking out because if they don't do that, then they will cease to exist. They will eventually peter out and die. So it's an institutional survival instinct.
Yeah, that makes
And I
sense.
think, when you think about where the leadership and the power is in churches, it's usually like, I'll just use the language of our current generations, like that boomer and older kind of, those are the leaders and those are the people that are the elders and that are giving and have all the money. Well, in a good way, they also have this like kind of grandfatherly, grandmotherly sort of desire to see like we've built a legacy, like we want to leave something behind. So I don't think it's, malicious all the time. It's just instinctual. I think it's just like it's almost like this evolutionary instinct to think in that way. But yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I experienced. I mean, I think there's a reason that so many people, if you were to just go down the line with you know, people who have had experiences with faith or religious trauma or whatever, they would
Mhm.
probably point to some kind of incredibly emotional environment like a retreat,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
where you get taken away and you are together and
Yes.
it creates this environment and the emotion of the power of music and all those things and the call to commitment and so on. Like
Hmm.
over time, churches kind of have this institutional knowledge that this works. This is how the Holy Spirit works, but it's like this is how the Holy Spirit likes to work.
That's a good
So,
differentiation.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't know what it's like in the Mormon church, but it's like they know that sending missionaries out when they're young. They don't send missionaries out when they're in their 50s. I
Right.
mean, maybe they do,
Right.
but I doubt it. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like there's a
Yeah.
there's a pattern to it because it just like locks it in. So,
Mhm. I think that's a good like comparison. One of my closest girlfriends is ex-Mormon. And I mean, yeah,
mm,
they get you when they're 18 to go out on a mission for 2 years where you're completely in this bubble
yeah, you're
of,
isolated. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So I definitely get that. So it's yes, I always feel like religion does not have the corner market on like fundamentalism or, kind of this way of marketing. But of course, we come out of it, from that religious piece. I get that.
For
Yeah.
sure.
So going back to like the pastoring piece, you said you were in
Yeah.
ministry for 17 years. Is that right? Or
Yeah, that's right.
almost 20? Okay.
Hmm.
Would you mind sharing whatever you feel comfortable? Like, what were some of the things that caused like pause or
Mm.
experiences or theological doctrines that you were like, huh, I've got to think on that more, that kind of eventually led you to the place of leaving the church?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. As I said earlier, I was the type of person that didn't ask enough questions. I just
Mm,
jumped in with my whole heart to support
yes,
the kind of
I get that.
team platform. So when I joined the church, I guess I was not the specific church that I pastored at. I went out and I moved to Maryland. I became a youth intern. I was living with the senior pastor. There was a widespread knowledge that I was going to be his replacement. He told me that early on.
Mm,
You're going to be the next senior pastor. You're going to be the next leader of this movement. And I'm
wow.
just like, oh my gosh, this guy's like a, as he would say it, like a small a apostle in
I
this
mean, I
movement.
believe I know who you're talking about. I truly believe that.
For
I was
sure. Yeah.
there with you. Yeah.
And so, I had so much respect for him and in the environment that we were in, he was just so esteemed, so respected.
Mm-hmm.
So, he's telling me this and I'm just like, "Oh my gosh, this is incredible." So, I didn't have moments where I was like, I really want to wrestle through all the different sides of these different issues. I really
Right.
want to grapple with you know, this aspect of the doctrine of atonement or whatever it
Mm,
might be. I was more the posture of I want to learn, I want to take all this in, I believe it all, that kind of a
yeah.
thing. So it was
Hmm.
really, and I didn't go to seminary. So I
Oh, yeah.
moved out there, didn't go to college or seminary. So homeschooled, published a magazine, wrote a book that became a bestseller, was the youth intern, and was in a context where college, my mentor had not gone to college. Um,
Yeah.
and so I think there was, a big part of me that was drawn to that, like, oh, here's a guy who, appreciates that there's a different pathway. And my dad was not a big like proponent of higher education. It was kind of like learn from people that are doing it, which
Interesting. Yeah.
there's a place for that in certain areas, but
Right. Yeah.
when it comes to theological training, I didn't have a period of time where I was in a setting where it was like, hey, let's look at all the traditions and the different streams of belief and, compare and contrast and debate and so on. It was right into one church with a very narrow view of things. And I would say, that really filtered. So it's like you don't even read these theologians because they're wrong.
Right.
It was not let's
Yeah.
engage with them. It was let's curate the bookstore and let's keep out anything that is incorrect in
Yes.
any way according to us. So
Yes.
I
Hmm.
so again, I put a lot of the blame on my own personality, but then I put myself in a setting that didn't ever encourage me to ask other questions or listen to other voices. So long answer to what you're asking me. It was quite a while until I started asking questions. And I would say they weren't primarily like doctrinal per se, like, wait a minute, I'm not sure I believe this specific doctrine. It was more, wait a second, what are we actually producing here? Like what's the actual result of what's happening? And the way that happened in our church setting is that um, the internet enabled people who didn't have a voice in our church structure to start sharing their stories, finding each other, and challenging leadership on the way that they were living. So there were anonymous blogs that were writing stories about, hey, this pastor said this to me, this person did this to me. There were, a lot of it was like pretty, the internet, anonymous internet, it can be pretty mean.
Yes.
And
Very
we never
much.
know
Yeah.
exactly how much of it is true, but there was enough on there where people who are part of these churches were like, this stuff is true because we know we've seen these patterns. But then what happened was things started coming out related to sex abuse. Like, hey, our child was abused, and we brought the child to the pastors, and the pastors handled it in these ways, and in bad ways,
Yeah.
didn't encourage them to
Yeah.
report sex abuse, all those kinds of things. And so that became a massive issue in our church. And we as pastors, we were kind of, I was leading the team at that point, and there was a lot of tension between me and my mentor because we disagreed about ways that I was leading. And
Mm.
our team took the posture of we need to be humble, we need to listen to the sheep and interact with
Yeah.
them. And so I hosted meetings in my house,
Mm.
much to the chagrin of a lot of the leadership of our denomination.
Okay.
I hosted meetings where I invited people to come and share their stories. And the reason I think that the other leaders got so upset about this is because it did create a setting where other people could hear other people's stories. And the pattern of leadership in our church was, oh, you have a problem? Come talk to a pastor privately where no one will ever
Yes.
know, and he will ignore what you're saying.
Yeah. So you can
So,
contain it. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And,
Yeah.
it's kind of like the
Wow.
suggestion box that
Mm.
it just goes right to a fire, or a shredder, like you never,
Yeah.
it never gets
Yeah.
anywhere. So these people came into our living room and were sharing these stories, and they were just heartbreaking stories. There were stories about uh, being pushed out of leadership because their kids weren't doing well or because they didn't homeschool. These real cultural types of issues that just showed. I mean, now you would put it in the language of people who'd experienced real religious trauma, like the way in which leaders had treated them had harmed them and hurt them. They still loved Jesus. They were still in this church. They were coming because they wanted to, like, voice this pain. And it was really heartbreaking. And it also was eye-opening for me to go, there's a culture that we've built, regardless of what we say about grace, regardless of what we say about being gospel centered, we're creating an environment where people know they have to perform in a certain way. If they don't meet certain standards, they're not accepted, they're pushed out, or they're not given opportunities, and they know this to their core,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they're in pain over it. And this
Yeah.
is not a culture of grace. This is a culture of rules and isolation and just a lot of pain. And I saw that my books had been a part of that. I began to see, like, oh, the way my books have played a part in this has been quite significant. So that, I think, was a really pivotal moment for me, saying there's something off here.
Okay.
And as I began to try to lead the church in some, you know, changes, like we apologized as pastors to the church for a list of things that we
Mm.
learned from that group.
Wow.
And then right after that, there was a massive explosion in our movement where leaders were fighting publicly, and there was, churches were leaving the movement, and there was so much debate about how to
That's
handle
right.
things
Yep.
and accountability and all those things. And then our church left that denomination. And then right after that, we got hit with a lawsuit about how we'd reported sex abuse. So there's just like wave after
Mhm.
wave of controversy,
Mhm.
of, clouds of suspicion, all these really good people in the church who felt really used and misled, and then they were distrustful. And so it was in that environment that I was just like, what in the world am I a part of? And not a part of, like, oh, I was this innocent person that got brought into this movement, it's all their fault. No, I wanted to be a part of this movement. I was attracted to it because something in me liked what they were giving and liked their desire to make me a leader. And then I dove in, whole hog, believed all of it, taught all of it, propagated all of it. And even in that process, realized, oh, there was a key moment where someone came and brought a story of past abuse, and we tried to deal with that with, forgiveness and reconciliation, and not saying, hey, call the police. So it's like, I felt this incredible sense of, like, oh my goodness, I've participated in this. I've failed people in a powerful way. And I think for me, I realized that the kind of turning point for me in deciding to step down and go to seminary in Canada
Mhm.
was this recognition of these people need to be led out of a broken system, but I have been trained by this broken system, and I
Wow. Yeah.
don't know how to lead them out of it. Like all of my impulses and patterns as a leader have been shaped by this
Mm,
same broken system. And
mm.
so I stepped down. The church was very kind to me. They sent me with love, and I, moved across the country and moved to a different country across the continent,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
went to seminary, and that became a place where I began to like ask questions. That became a place where I had the space to recognize I didn't want to be a pastor anymore, and my deconstruction went beyond that. But that was the kind of the free space that enabled me to do that.
Yeah. It's so interesting to me how people's stories are so
Mm.
powerful. Like when we listen to them, it
Hmm.
tells us a totally different message and story than like the theology or what we're supposed to believe.
Yeah,
But once you hear it, it's like you can't unhear it. And
yeah,
and you're like, okay, but this is real. Like this is actually happening.
yeah.
Like I can't, I have to pay attention to that. I can't just turn a blind eye anymore, which is like awesome and also very humbling at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
that's
exactly
wild.
right. And that listening to stories really continued when I was in graduate school, this graduate school of theology, because
Hmm.
as a student, I was coming alongside other students who were telling me stories of how my book had negatively
Ah,
impacted
yes.
them. And
Yes.
it wasn't just people on the internet. It wasn't just, negative reviews on
Yeah.
Amazon. These were just fellow students. And I didn't feel the pressure
Hmm.
to have to be the representative of a church and
Yeah.
like I couldn't even
Yeah.
get up and say certain things as a pastor because I had to get the buy-in of all the other elders. And so now I was able to go, yeah, gosh, that's terrible. I'm sorry that my writing affected you in that way. And that led to a whole process of reconsidering my book and then apologizing for the book and unpublishing the book. And that wouldn't have happened without that exchange of stories, but now in a place where I could be responsive.
Yeah, I wonder if you can speak to that a little bit more because there is this unique dynamic with pastors and other ministry leaders like coming out of these systems where they
Hmm.
were both, like essentially like the victim and the perpetrator. But it's that
Hmm.
dual role of like,
Yeah.
you didn't just wake up one day and you're like, I want to have power and control over somebody. Like this was something that you had experienced yourself and been taught even like this is a dynamic that's godly
Hmm.
and the right way to do it.
Yeah.
So that was like harm done to you. And then there's the weird piece with being in formal ministry positions of then doing that to others, which is a
Yeah.
lot. That's a lot to hold.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if you might be able to kind of speak to that, whatever direction you want to take it.
Yeah. I think that in communities like this, it is really important to try to parse that out and recognize both where you were harmed by that system and where you were a part of that system and harmed other people. Um, because I think that part of the healing, at least for me, is both those things. Like it's not healthy for me just to stay in a blame mindset, to be like, oh my gosh,
Right.
my mentor is the
Yes.
evil one. He taught
Yeah.
me all these
Yeah.
things. And, you know,
Yeah.
um, he learned that from other people as well, and he passed that
Right.
on. And I have very distinct memories of my own propagation of those ideas,
Mm,
where we'd be in small groups with other pastors, and this really talented, smart woman, one of the pastor's wives, uh, wanted to pursue, I think it was veterinary school. I can't even remember what it was, but we just like
hmm.
came down so hard. Like, where's your commitment to your
Uh,
home? It was just like that kind
yeah.
of teaching. We did that to other people.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
somebody's, child like gets into a dating relationship with someone that's not a Christian, and just like the way that we raked them
Yeah.
over the coals, supposedly lovingly, um, and made it about their parenting. Like, oh, where did you mess up? And so much of it is driven by fear. It's like if it's not because they messed up,
Hmm.
then it could happen to us. But if you believe that it's just their fault because
Oh, yeah.
they weren't purposeful enough, they didn't do long enough quiet times, they didn't do enough date nights with their kids, they didn't do something, if you can pinpoint that and then you can challenge them and blame them, saying it's all covered by grace, you then feel safe
Wow.
because you're like, well, I'm going to do even more with my kids. They are going to memorize more scriptures,
Right.
and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you create that environment. And that's the whole
Mm-hmm.
definition of culture. It's not just coming from one person.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's a network of relationships. It's a network of not just the pastor coming and challenging you, but Sister Betty making a snide remark about, your blouse being too tight or something, whatever it might be. You know what I'm
Oh,
saying?
yeah.
It's this
I
whole
know Sister
culture.
Betty.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, we all know Sister Betty. She's kind of hot, actually, Sister Betty. No, I'm kidding. No, but
Probably.
yeah, she's got her own repressed issues,
Yeah,
obviously.
exactly.
But that's the whole reality. We're coming
Yeah.
with all these like fears ourselves, and then we're bringing that
Mhm.
into community,
Yeah.
and then kind of like throwing up all over each other in a sense. All that fear and all that control and all that manipulation, so that it's so hard to stand up and say, I don't want to do this, or I don't feel comfortable with this, or actually I do want to have a career, or I want to be a pastor and I'm a woman, like I think we should rethink this. Like you can't do those things. You can't have those conversations. And anybody that has the wherewithal to do that ends up getting pushed out of the community. And so it's like this self-reinforcing um, pattern that takes place where the people who are left are more bought in, they're more likely to
Hmm.
be
Yeah.
compliant
Yeah.
and to marry compliant people and,
Yeah.
continue that pattern of control with their kids. And then the more bought in you are, the harder it is to stop and say, well, this is really messed up, because then you're saying, my whole life is a lie. My marriage, my parenting, the all that I've invested in, this has all been a waste. Like it's so hard to question even small things because all the small things are connected to the whole. And that's the power of culture.
Yeah. Well, and even going back to what you said earlier, like this was your identity, like your professional and personal life
Mhm.
were one. And
Yeah.
I think it takes a very brave person to go all the way back to that and start going, oh shit, like I may have made a mistake, like
Mhm.
and not in a shaming way, but just saying like as I tease these things apart, I'm seeing things in a much different way now
Yeah.
that my identity is not so tied to this specific system,
Yeah.
essentially.
Well, I do know people who are quite brave. I don't feel like I've been brave. I feel like my life fell apart, and like that Katy Perry song, Being Wide Awake, you fell from cloud nine and you hit the pavement. And then you're like,
Yeah.
oh, wow.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Yeah.
that's really what it was
Mhm.
like for me. It's like I
Mhm.
just felt so, exposed publicly and crushed by my own sense of failure.
Mhm. Mhm.
um, and that's what enabled me to question and to say, you know what, I don't think I got this right. I think there were some real
Mhm.
problems here.
Mhm.
Um, but I understand why so many people don't do that. Like it is so
Yeah.
disruptive. It's
Mhm.
been, disruptive on an emotional level. It's been disruptive. I can feel, sadness for the loss that my kids have experienced, taking them
Oh,
out of
yeah.
the only community
Yeah.
they know. They've all done
Mhm.
incredibly well. I'm so proud of them. They're amazing
Yeah.
humans. But the upheaval of my marriage ending,
Yeah.
all those kinds of things. And even like with faith is a huge connector of people. And so when you step out of
Yes.
that, there's this
Mhm.
massive
Mhm.
loss, even just like professionally. Suddenly there are all these people that are
Oh,
like, you're
yeah.
dangerous. You're not on our team
Yeah.
anymore.
Mhm.
And I never thought of faith in that way. I was always just like, I
Mhm.
just believe this and so on. But
Yeah.
it is very difficult to step out of identities and tribes for sure.
Yeah. Which is why I think you actually are brave. Because the easier thing would be, I mean, not to be, is to not listen to yourself and to
Mm,
say, I'm going to blindly follow because that is easier. I keep my community, I keep my family, I keep my relationship, I keep my identity, my job, especially for pastors or anybody in those professional positions. Like, you literally are losing everything. Not only like the logistics, but everything you knew to be true, everything
Yeah.
that you like spent your blood, sweat, and tears on for decades.
Right.
I think that's brave because like that's the type of person who goes, I have to risk it. Like,
Mm.
I'm at this point where I can either just like be blind and keep going in that direction,
Yeah.
or I unravel it. And that's what you chose to do. But I do think that for a lot of people, especially at first, that's the harder thing to do,
Mm.
to undo it all. And it can take a lifetime too. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's not just this
No,
like one and
thanks for
done.
being so encouraging. This is why you're
Yeah.
such an amazing therapist.
Well, but I believe it. I believe it
No,
because
I appreciate it.
yeah, I look back at my own journey, my clients, my friends, it's not the easier path. It
Mm.
isn't all the time. It becomes easier, I think. It becomes more freeing and liberating. Like, I think we're both at a point in our own lives where we're like maybe like on the other side, we're like,
Yeah.
oh, this is pretty damn awesome. Like,
Yeah.
I'm enjoying this life, but it was not without struggle to get there.
Right.
Um, and I can imagine even with your notoriety within the Christian community,
Mm.
there's even more loss there. I
Mm.
mean, I read the articles of other people calling you out, and I'm like, oh gosh, like that's a lot to navigate, you know?
Yeah. I think one of the hardest things, and I see this with friends and other people too, is that it's easy to leave one group if you can jump into another,
100%.
you
Yes.
know.
Mhm.
But when you feel like you don't have a home or a group, I think that's
Yes.
what's really tough. And that was a big
Mhm.
learning for me. I think I was when I first like publicly said, "Hey, I'm not in the same place with faith. I can't
Mhm.
I can't call myself a Christian the same way I used to call myself a Christian."
Mhm.
And I feel like I'm still in a process of exploring and asking and searching myself.
Yeah.
But my old buddies out there, they would definitely not call me a Christian. So I'll just say it before they say it. So, um,
Sure, sure.
you know, but I think there was an impulse to like want to find, that other group or find that same sense of feeling needed, you know.
Yes.
And understandably, my history is one that's really negatively impacted a lot of people. Like whether or not this is completely fair, I represent purity culture. It's like purity culture, Josh
I
Harris,
know.
So for a lot of people, like they see my name regardless of what I'm doing, and it's like, why is that asshole still around? You know what I mean?
I
And
know. Yeah.
and I think I've come to a place of being like, okay, I get that. Like that makes sense.
Mhm.
And I have to deal with my own process of like, okay, what am I what am I wanting? What am I doing? Why am I speaking
Mhm.
up at any given moment? Why am I participating
Mhm.
in a conversation or all those kinds of things? And be able to say like, okay, it's not about replacing that same feeling that I had in my old tribe with a new one.
Mhm.
And actually
Mhm.
part of my journey
Yeah.
is letting go of that and
Yeah. Yeah.
really experiencing like an even deeper level of transformation.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Okay. I know I didn't prep you for this question, but it just thought of this. If you could tell, and kind of speaking like as as maybe as a representative of all former pastors, which I know you're not, but like, let's just pretend for a minute.
Yeah.
But if you could speak to people that weren't in those positions about like some of the unique pieces that you're having to heal from
Hmm.
that you wish they might understand, what would that be? I mean, I have some ideas because of being in professional ministry, and I have several
Right.
friends who are former pastors and members of the clergy. But I would be curious to know, yeah, from you if you feel comfortable sharing.
Oh, that's such an interesting question. So you're saying like if you're in ministry and leadership, and you step out of and there's, the church
Yeah.
or you're deconstructing or whatever it
Yeah.
might be, what's kind
Hmm.
of the unique pain or trauma that you experience?
Yeah, and I guess I'll qualify that one other way too, because I have heard from a lot of people that have never been in professional ministry
Mm,
positions that like, hey, you are already the quote unquote leader. Like, why do
yeah,
you like your voice doesn't matter now? Your experience doesn't matter because you hurt me. Like,
yeah,
I don't really care about this process or struggle or anything like
hmm,
that. There's not a
hmm,
lot of like that compassionate witness piece. Like,
mm,
oh, like we said, you were both in the system as like somebody who was harmed in the system and then had the extra piece of being
hmm,
somebody who may have harmed others. So,
yeah,
yeah, I what would you want them to know? Because there's some really sticky dynamics there.
yeah.
Mm,
Well, it's so interesting. First of all, I've had a lot of amazing conversations with people who have shown me so much kindness,
mm,
and have been so gracious to me. I remember early on when I was rethinking I Kiss Dating Goodbye, it was people in the LGBTQ community in particular who were willing to have um,
wow.
off the record conversations with me where they just like explained like their experience, how my book contributed to hurt for them. And
Mhm.
they were, I think, some of the most like loving and gracious people to to just treat me as a human, you know?
That's
And
beautiful.
I think that is the um, thing that I would just say is like, yeah, these leaders, you looked to them, us, in a way that was really unhealthy, and we encourage that, as if we were like
Hmm.
superhuman. But the reality is
Yes.
we're just humans who have baggage and hangups, and maybe people like that are more drawn to leadership positions because it's like they're looking to fill a
Sure.
bigger hole. I'm not sure all that's going on
Hmm.
there. The other thing I think is that's unique as I think about it is that it's not just your community when you're a leader, it's also your job and like what you're good at.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so it'd be kind of like if you were, in the church just as a layperson, and leaving the church meant you also needed to completely quit your career.
Yes. Yes.
So there's like this added layer of identity and just
Yeah.
like survival that I
Yeah.
think is and I mean, leaders got all the perks, so I understand why people are extra pissed at them. I totally get that,
Sure. Fair. Yeah.
but it is this
Yeah.
extra layer of you're not just stepping out of a community, you're also kind of like supposed to lay down the gifts that you have. Like, you're kind of like the
Yes.
thing that you contribute is you speak or you teach other people or you try to care for
Yes.
people and that kind of thing. And I think that's where I've gotten into the most trouble myself is where I've been on this journey of
Mhm.
trying to figure out like how do I show up with those gifts? Like I want to help people still. I want to help people who are like, you know, asking these questions about faith. And because I'm thinking about that and people are DMing me wanting me to talk about it. But then when I do, people are like, do not even, like, please.
I know.
And so it's like it's been
Yeah.
a process
Yeah.
for me of just being like, okay, I'm needing to figure out where I use my gifts in different ways.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
maybe I'm just like so triggering to people. And so that's just been my personal
Hmm.
journey. But I kind of want to fight for other people's right to still show up.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
see like there's this former pastor I follow, we've interacted a few times. He just does such great content, and he would still say he's a Christian, and but he's
Mm.
deconstructed and he's helping people. And I see sometimes people getting super angry at him, like, "Why are you doing this course?" or "Why are
Yeah.
you, whatever." And I
Yeah.
kind of want to like fight for his right to still do that. It's like we need to let people show up. It's okay to not listen to them. It's okay to say, I don't want to follow you. It's okay to even disagree with them. But like to say to any other human being, you're not allowed to show up and voice your perspective. I think we're in dangerous territory
Hmm.
because to me,
Agreed.
that reminds me of my old church. That
Yes.
reminds me of
Yes.
a context that said, "Oh, you're a woman, you're not allowed to teach. Oh, you're too liberal, you're not allowed to show up. Oh, you're this, you don't have any kind of platform and we just silence your voice." So, I mean, I feel like evangelicalism is like the uh originator of cancel culture, honestly. You know what I'm saying?
1000%.
It's
Yes,
like this real sense
yes.
of like you don't deserve to have a voice at all. We did that to so many people. And so when I see that in other settings, I think it troubles me because I don't think it leads to the freedom of thought that enables people to sort through things.
Yeah, I very much agree. The recreation of, a fundamentalist system just
Mhm.
without religion, essentially.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
And I love what you said too. Like I think part of the most rebellious thing we can do outside of religion is have choices and
Mm,
like just, like I can choose to listen to you or not. And like that has no eternal
yeah.
consequence, and so I would agree with you. There's space for so many people's voice, for everybody's voice and
Yeah.
experience, and that me speaking does not mean you have to listen or agree or anything. And I do wish, as I'm in that, especially on social media space of like post religion, post purity culture, um, I'm like, yeah, you don't have to listen. Like, you don't have to even listen. You might agree with me, and you still don't have to like listen or do what I say or like,
Right.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
about your own choice and autonomy. And I do wish people understood that more because I do think it would give pastors or former pastors in particular a way to also work their own stuff out, just like everybody else is working it out.
Well,
Yeah,
it's interesting. I think that I mean, I think the unique thing about me and other leaders is that we benefited from the system financially. Like
for
we
sure.
led
For
and we were
sure.
paid. My books sold. I made money off those books.
Hmm.
Gosh, I wish I hadn't given so much of it right back to the church. I tell you, that's like one of my,
Yeah,
I'm like, oh Lord,
I
goodness gracious.
know.
But
Yeah.
so there's an understandable sense of like, okay,
Yeah.
you benefited from this and now you changed
Mhm.
and you're whatever, you're selling a
Mhm.
course or you're doing whatever. And again, like you just don't have to listen to me or anybody.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
understand that
Yeah.
frustration that people have.
Hmm.
I think that
Hmm.
it totally makes sense. But
Hmm.
the thing that I really want to like participate in making the world a place where
Hmm.
people can change their mind and then not just be eternally punished, but are
Oh,
allowed to
yeah.
like have a voice
Yeah.
to talk about that change. Because if you don't enable people to have a post-change like place in society, then no one is motivated to change. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
whether that's on a political level,
Yeah.
or a
Hmm.
religious level, or just whatever. If it's like,
Hmm.
hey, you once believed that, so now you're not at any table, like literally
Yeah.
F you, go to
Yeah.
hell, we never want to hear from you. Well, then what does that say to all the people that are still at this other, still in that wrong mindset? They're like, well, I've got no future unless I just hunker down, basically.
Yes.
And so that to
Absolutely.
me, that's the reason why I think we've got to become a place where people are allowed to change.
Mm.
We invite them to use the gifts and abilities and perspectives, the learnings that they have.
Mhm.
Because if we don't do that, then we're just all stuck and no one can grow. And the only thing we can do is kill each other.
Yeah. I mean, you're not wrong. Yeah. Like,
You know?
unfortunately, but
Yeah.
you're right. Yeah. Absolutely. So, what would you say to your 20-year-old self if you could go back and give him some words of wisdom? What would you say?
Oh gosh, I've played this out in my mind in different times. This is where like alternate universes are so unhelpful because I can't figure
Yeah.
the only universe I want to be a part of is the one where I have my three amazing kids.
Of
So
course.
it's like,
Yes.
okay,
Yeah.
we gotta at least have these amazing kids.
Yes.
But
Okay. They're in it. Yeah.
if they're allowed to be in any of those universes, I mean,
Mhm.
I definitely think that I would want to say, don't don't put this book out in the world. You got so much to learn, and it will put so much pressure on so many people, including yourself.
Wow.
So much
Yeah.
pressure to
Yeah.
live up to a crazy standard that's not even in the Bible.
Mm.
I would say go to school or just get exposed to a ton of different perspectives and ideas. Um, and it's so funny though, because it's almost like someone that's asleep, if they're having a dream. I don't know if this is true, but like it's hard to wake someone up, or you shouldn't wake them up or whatever. And
Hmm.
there is a certain sense of that. Like people change and see things in their own time, and you can't force it on
Hmm.
them. And
Yeah.
so there's a part of me that I even look back on myself and I'm just like, okay, I can put blame on a lot of different people. But the reality is like when I was in my 20s, I was locked into a certain way of viewing the world.
Hmm.
And it's not
Hmm.
like, you know, a piece of information could have taken me out of that. Like I had to go down this path, and
Yeah.
it took too long, and it
Hmm.
was painful, and all these things happened.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
that gives me a lot of sympathy for other people.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. I do too.
I will I will get these messages from people, and they will like I'll discover like a DM, because when a lot of stuff happened in my life public, this is back in 2019 when my marriage ended and those kinds of things. I must have gotten a million messages, and I just never even, was able to even see them all, because you just like you can't even scroll through them all. But then what will happen is someone will message me again, like 3 years later, 4 years later, 5 years later.
And they'll see it.
And
Yeah.
you'll see their new message and their old message. Their old message will
Mm.
be like just reaming me out. You were never a Christian. You were,
Mm.
you're just a false prophet, all this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And then their new message is like, yeah, I'm really going through some stuff, and I'm really
Mm.
rethinking aspects of my faith. And, like
Yeah.
it's so, and
Yeah.
I'm not like gleeful, like, haha, your life is fall. It's
No.
just like, it's just this
Yeah.
reminder of like, yeah, I would have written myself one of those, my past me. I was one of those people that was, just
Hmm.
giving it to Rob Bell on Twitter, like farewell, Rob Bell,
Oh
retweeting
yeah.
John
Yes.
Piper, like
Retweeting John.
saying all
Yeah.
these things. And I would have done the same thing to me. Like, how
Yeah.
can you end your marriage?
Mm.
You're such a hypocrite. You never
Mm.
believed any of these things. You were never really a Christian. And
Yeah.
then you go through a little bit of life and you have some things fall apart, and you realize, maybe that's not
Yeah.
really who God is. And you're
Yeah. Yeah.
softer and you're at a different place, but you can't force that transformation.
Yeah.
Like people are
Yeah.
gonna, if they're gonna change like that, it's got to happen on their own time.
Yeah, I agree. I do remember I sent you a message when all the stuff came out in 2019. I want to say it was on Twitter. I'll have to go back and check.
Oh, funny.
But I think my whole thing was like, "Hey, it's going to be okay.
Oh,
Like it's
wow.
going to be really hard right now, but there are
Yeah,
people who are rooting for you because this is like
that's so
you're making
kind.
the brave choice."
Yeah.
So, and I would stand by that message today.
You've always been so kind to me. I
Oh.
remember when I went out to Nashville and you took the time to
Mhm.
sit down with me, and you just the way that you share your own journey, and the way that
Mm.
you contribute even parts of your story that are painful to help in other people's healing, I just think is so wonderful. So I'm really grateful for that.
No, well, it is. I like that I can call you a friend. You're not just, the purity
I
culture
love that.
poster child. You are
Uh,
now my friend. We're text friends. We met in real life,
exactly.
so this is a good
Exactly.
thing. Yeah. So I want to be respectful of your time. I'll ask you. I have two kind of hopefully
Yeah,
short
for
questions.
sure.
One is we asked everybody is if you could speak to other professional Christians, maybe who
Mm,
are starting to ask questions or
yeah.
starting to think, should I take some steps out? Or maybe have just kind of left that environment. What would you want to say to them?
I would want to say go easy on yourself.
Mm.
There's
Yeah.
no there's no specific timeline. You don't have to rush this, and it doesn't have to look like anybody else's process.
Yeah.
My particular process was very public and messy. Uh, that's not the definition of, courage or faithfulness. It can look however you
Sure.
want. And I
Mm.
think that's kind of the beauty of stepping away from a black and white way of thinking. Like,
Hmm.
make this look the way that's good for you.
Yes. Yes.
And also just show yourself a lot of grace.
Hmm.
Um, the other thing I would just say is like these all of this runs really deep in your life if you've been in ministry and it's tied to your
Yeah. Yeah.
career and all those kinds of things. And so there are lots of layers to it. And
Hmm.
being able to ask those questions of why did I really believe this or why did I go along with
Hmm.
this is going to be difficult, but I think is really important. And
Yeah.
part of the process is going to be forgiving other
Mhm.
people who harmed you and
Yeah.
forgiving yourself along the way,
Hmm.
and also seeking
Agreed.
the forgiveness of people. I mentioned
Hmm.
those different pastors that I think about how, the ways that I treated them was so unkind, so un-Jesus like. I've, gone back to those people and I've had those conversations and I've asked their forgiveness. And that's been really healing and beautiful.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's so cool. Are there any like go-to resources or things that were particularly helpful, whether it's books or podcasts or people accounts,
Mm,
whatever, that were particularly helpful to you in your own kind of healing journey?
yeah. Um, a friend gave me Richard Rohr's book, Falling Upward, in a moment where I was really just starting to question. I would have still considered myself a believer at that time, and that spoke to me so much, and it still does. I mean, I love the way Richard Rohr holds faith and belief. He's an inspiration to
Yes.
me. But
Hmm.
that book explained so much of what I was going through. It normalized it. It helped me see that it wasn't even just a church thing. It wasn't even just a ministry thing. It was a common human thing to reach that point in your life where you either wildly succeed and you realize you're not happy, or it all falls apart and you're like, what in the world have I been giving myself to? And so
Yeah.
just to be like reminded that, you're part of a very normal human process. What I
Yeah.
was confronted with that book is when those things fall apart, you're faced with this choice. Are you going to let it unravel and learn and evolve and grow? Or
Hmm.
are you going to double down and just try to do all the stuff you've been doing even harder?
Hmm.
And I see a lot of people who are just doubling down, it's like
Yes. Yeah.
more conservative, more angry, more
Hmm.
disciplined, all those kinds of
Hmm.
things. And I just don't see the life and the joy, and even, if you want to use religious language, I just don't see the Holy Spirit in that. But these other people that are unraveling, unlearning, whether you ever want to touch the deconstruction word, that's another piece of advice. You don't ever have to use that word if you don't want to,
No.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have to join some group or movement or whatever, but
Mhm.
that journey, I think, is so beautiful, and there's so much adventure and discovery there, and that's the one I'm still on.
I love it. Oh, well, Josh, it's been such a delight to have you here today. I'm just really grateful that we had time to talk. Um, and can you just share where can people kind of follow along, hear about you, social media, all that sort of thing?
Yeah, I have a website which is just my name, joshharris.com.
Okay.
And from there, you can find a podcast that I do, which is mostly like business and big ideas and those types of things. But
Yeah.
everything I do has this, lens of my story over it, and a lot of the people I connect with are either still in the church or have some connection there because those conversations are just really interesting to me. But yeah, the website joshharris.com is where you can find all that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. It's
Thanks for
been
having
just
me.
awesome.
This was a lot
Yeah.
of fun.
All right. Thank you again to Josh Harris for such a lovely conversation. It was just really great to be able to talk to him. I love being able to talk about complex topics, and I really do think that there's so many people that are coming out of paid ministry positions, pastors, clergy, that struggle with this dual piece of being somebody who was harmed and harmed others. And so I love Josh's ability to be able to speak to both of those and to do so in such a way where there was ownership as well as compassion. And I know for myself, I've personally really appreciated that. I have been able to talk to many people that I was in relationship with as a result of ministry. I was some sort of a ministry leader or had a role of leadership over them. And I have really appreciated being able to go back and talk with them and make amends and apologize for the harm that I created and the harm that they had to deal with in a very real way, even years after leaving that system. I feel personally very encouraged that they took the time to do that and that we've been able to have such productive conversations as a result of that. And I know that's not everybody's experience, but it's been something that for me in my own healing process has been really important. And I hear that in Josh's conversation as well as he talks about his own experiences. So it's just really wonderful to be able to have somebody speak to that, especially somebody that was in such a position of leadership on both like within the church as well as on a national scale. I have many other friends who are former pastors, former ministry professionals that would echo Josh's sentiments in terms of that process of the healing piece of healing themselves as well as learning how to make amends and take ownership and responsibility. And I know it's a very difficult process, and that's not to say that they shouldn't go through it or that it's not important. It's just simply recognizing that this is another part of healing from religious trauma that many people are having to deal with, and it lends to the process of what I would say disembodying fundamentalism is allowing space for other people's stories to exist, not to necessarily agree with them or become best friends with them, but simply to let other people's stories and processes exist, and that we are all healing from this. And we can disagree, we can not like people, and that's okay. And we don't have to listen to them. And I think that actually can be a really empowering thing to bring with you, is that you are no longer required to listen to people like pastors. And if that means that you need to kind of write them off, for the rest of your life, even, and just not engage with them on social media or follow their journeys, I think that is perfectly fine. And I would encourage anybody to do that if they feel like that's what's best for them. And then for those of you who feel like maybe you can kind of touch base with them, that's fine too. The best part about healing from religious trauma is the choices that you get to make, and you get to make lots of them. So make them according to your values and to your priorities, and enjoy it.